Next quick start presentation is entitled Improved Nutrition Among Vulnerable Populations in Kenya Through Increased Access to and Consumption of Sustainable Fish Foods, or SecureFish, which is a partnership between Washington University in St. Louis, University of Rhode Island, Pawnee University, and Egerton University.
Okay, so thank you very much, Mark. My name is Laura Iannotti, and I am based at Washington University in St. Louis. And I'm presenting on behalf of a terrific team from my point of view. Those individuals are listed here, but there are many that are not listed, including some pretty impressive students that we have working with us from Pawnee University and Egerton University. I want to say thank you to USAID for the Quick Start framework. Those of us who do public health research, intervention research, this is a really critical part of the process to do formative research that can then inform intervention research. Okay, next slide, please, Jared. I'm going to go briefly through rationale and design as instructed by MSU. Because presumably you're aware of this already, but we designed this study to address a critical problem that I think can be addressed by the Fish Innovation Lab more broadly and globally, and that's the problem of stunting. And stunting is a measure of chronic malnutrition, and it's very high along the coast of Kenya. I want to take a minute for you to focus on the photo. Those of us in public health and in research, we forget sometimes the human beings behind these problems. And the middle child really represents this problem of stunting, but also underweight. She's very thin, you can see that. And that is a problem that's related to hidden hunger or deficiencies in certain nutrients, again, where I think great potential lies with fish. So zinc nutrition and zinc deficiency, this child is probably suffering from that. As well as enteric infection or diarrhea. There's low dietary diversity in vulnerable groups that we're focused on. Marine fisheries in Kenya is chronically overexploited, 4-time decrease in the catch. So one of the points behind our study was an attempt to really converge disciplines. So on our team, we have public health nutrition, we have fisheries ecology, we have an economist. And so our effort was really focused on trying to look at the intersection of these disciplines to think about ways that fish can solve these problems. Next slide, please. Next, okay. So the design was a quasi-experimental observational study, and we compared fishing versus non-fishing households because we're really interested in these small fisher households along the coast of Kenya, and looking at the nutritional status of the vulnerable groups in the households and how that is positioned with fishery production in that region. We used mixed methods, again, thanks to the tremendous team that we have. We collected anthropometric measures. You can see that on the top, in the top photo. We did qualitative research, 24-hour intakes. We collected quantitative data on socioeconomic and demographic data, value chain analysis, and WASH stands for water, sanitation, and hygiene. Next slide, please. This is a photo from one of the community meetings. The map on the right shows the communities that we were working on, 2 in the north and 2 in the south. And as it turns out, we probably saw greater disparities, nutrition disparities between the north and the south as compared to fishing versus non-fishing households, which was interesting. Next slide. Okay, so this is the key finding from my point of view, and Austin will cover the key findings from the fisheries point of view. But what you could see is what is embodied in the title of the presentation, which is the paradox. And that is that height for age Z-score, which is an indicator of that stunting problem of malnutrition, is higher in the fisher households. So on the right is the distribution for the non-fishing households in red, and on the left in the blue line, you can see the distribution for the fishing households. So overall takeaways here is that children in the fishing households were more malnourished, but really all of the kids were. And you can see they really should be, those distributions should be over 0 if this is compared to the WHO growth standards. Next slide. When we ran our regression models, we found that in fact, there's lower dietary diversity in the fishing households as compared to the non-fishing households. And dietary diversity, fish and other animal source foods tends to tip children into a higher dietary diversity score. And that's really ultimately what we want, because then you're getting the broad range of nutrients that you need in your diet. We saw that hyper-H z-score did disappear, adjusting for the other factors. But then there were some other factors that we will address in the next phase of this project. And those are things like maternal education, diverse income portfolio, which I think represents a construct of resilience in the Fish Innovation Lab. Fever, so infection clearly is related to the nutritional status. Toilet sharing, again, that's a construct coming from water sanitation and hygiene. The more people who share a toilet, the higher the likelihood that there's poor sanitation conditions. And then my colleagues at Egerton University did a beautiful analysis of nutrient intakes. And sadly, we found that very few of the children are reaching 100% of their nutrient intake requirements. And if you just focus on the bottom line of zinc, which is highly concentrated in fish, you can see only 1.5% of these kids are meeting the zinc requirement, only 7.5 for iron and some of the other really critical nutrients. Next slide, please. Then the qualitative research findings, and I want to credit Kristen in communications for pulling out a very important quote from the qualitative research. And this is because the preparation method for fish really matters for child nutrition. So along the coast, the caregivers are giving the fish in the form of soup. And soup is not as good as, say, frying it because of those fat-soluble nutrients that we want to deliver in a bioavailable matrix to these kids. The other key finding from the qualitative research was that cost was the leading barrier to fish consumption in the fishing households, and that's very important. Okay, I'm going to turn this over now to Austin. Next slide.
All right, thanks, Laura. I'm Austin Humphreys, an associate professor at University of Rhode Island. And Laura, I think, did a wonderful job of describing sort of the household conditions and consumption, what that looks like in our sites, North and South Coast, and between fishing and non-fishing households. I'd like to sort of take us back to the sea a little bit as we trace the fish availability and access in these areas to get a better understanding of what's being caught, how it's being distributed, and how much is getting into the households, so to speak. And so we have a couple graphs, a couple slides here showing some of those value chain dynamics. And the first here is with regard to fish availability. So that's sort of the volume, or these top two graphs that you see, and the value of the catches. And along the y-axis are the different types of fish, from octopus to kind of a mixed reef fish catch. And then the three main reef fish that are caught in Kenya: changu are snappers, pono are parrotfish, and taffy are rabbitfish. And I've used icons here to kind of, they're on every slide, so your eye will start to recognize a little bit or associate those fish. And one takeaway from the fish availability perspective is that season matters. So there's a windy season and a calm season. And so there is some heterogeneity in what is available for fishers when it's calm versus when it is windy. And the value or the market responds somewhat appropriately, where when supply is down in the koozie or windy season, the price is a little bit higher. The specific numbers are not of extreme interest for this presentation, just those trends. Next slide, Jared. When looking at fisher revenue, we can see some differences here as well, where there's not too many differences between North and South Coast within the same fishery or the same organism, but you do see some differentiation in how much fishers are making depending on what they're targeting, right? So you see octopus fishers are making the most and parrotfish the least, Pono. Next slide, Jared. The fate of these fish, I think this is important for us as in the project as we focus on how fish are being distributed after they're caught. Are they being sold to local markets or are they being preserved or kept for household consumption, right? So we found that, again, in comparing the North Coast to the South Coast sites, we have the different actors in the value chain here on the y-axis, where you see fishers, women fryers, which are locally called mama karanga, small scale traders and large scale traders. And you can see some differences in how the fish are being handled or dealt with, where you know, a major finding is that in the North Coast, you see more green in the small scale and large scale trader actors, and those are fish that are being preserved. And that's a big issue in the coastal fisheries is spoilage, right? So there are some freezer access in the North Coast, which allow these traders to preserve more fish. But one other takeaway here is that, you know, fishers and women fryers they're keeping some fish for household consumption, but surprisingly, women fryers are keeping the least amount for their households to consume. Next slide, Jared. This is the final data slide I wanted to show, and these are just the value chains mapped out for two fisheries, the octopus and changu. And the numbers and everything are not particularly of interest here, but the main point, two things. One is that these value chains are not linear. They are not 2 or 3 actors. There are a number of actors in this fishery. There are agents, there are small scale traders, large scale traders, women fryers, consumers. So they are small scale fisheries, but these fish are going through multiple actors. And then second, and importantly, women are playing quite a large role. And I've outlined these shapes in red, the women fryers. And this differs according to what fish is being handled, but the main takeaway that we found is that a lot of fish are passing through women in these mama karangas, which is an important, you know, aspect for our future research. Next slide.
Okay, so just to bring it to conclusion, we have 2 more slides. The key findings or lessons learned from our perspective is that young children, a vulnerable group to malnutrition, in fishing households are in fact suffering from stunting. They are also very sick with diarrhea due to these water sanitation, hygiene conditions, and food safety, and importantly, not consuming enough fish. Cost and awareness are two major barriers to retaining fish, and we'll explain how we're going to respond to that. Austin, the last two there.
Yeah, and then as I pointed out on the last slide, you know, women are really important in the coastal fisheries system. A lot of fish pass through them. So they are important to consider when thinking about management strategies and increasing fisheries production or anything to do with the coastal fisheries. They must be included in the decision-making process, in the co-creation of research projects, questions, dissemination, so on and so forth. And then second is thinking about the specific types of fish that are caught in the coastal reef fishery. Taffy or rabbit fish represent, we believe, a place where fisher revenue is, I put okay, it's relatively high compared to the other species, and you know, it's the most sustainable being fish being caught, and this is largely due to its rapid life histories. So it grows really fast and it reproduces at a small size, so its population dynamics lend itself to being fished at a, you know, it can handle more fishing pressure than these other species. Next slide, Jared.
So where we see opportunities, first for our team and second for the Fish Innovation Lab more broadly, we will be conducting a cluster randomized control trial, again, to return to this idea of now we can intervene and think about improving the situation. It's a 12-month intervention packet that's bundled, and it includes two components. One is a social marketing intervention to increase awareness about the value of fish, as well as WASH. And I want to say thank you to Siobhan for introducing us to Advancing Nutrition, who this is a USAID funded project, and they will be helping us design that campaign. And then the second component is trap fishing, targeting, again, toffee as a sustainable gear type, but also nutritional food. And so have this little, you know, yes to toffee and no to pono is our motto for sustainable fisheries. And then I guess just to conclude, you know, some other thoughts that come to mind thinking across the other Fish Innovation Lab opportunities. Production can really increase the fish in the diets of vulnerable groups, not just young children, but pregnant lactating women, school-age children. Kathleen and I were just yesterday talking about school-age children and the importance of that for brain development. Fish provide nutrients that are really vital for brain development. And then in the value chain, fish food safety couldn't be more important for that gastrointestinal infection issue as relates to nutrition, reducing waste, as well as decreasing costs potentially. And then Austin, do you want to finish with that?
Yeah, and thinking about fisheries and aquaculture production and the linkages to diets and human health, I think thinking more broadly across the Phil projects about things like biodiversity and diversity in fisheries production, how that is related to dietary diversity, generally with higher catches and higher biodiversity in the ecosystem. One would hypothesize and expect higher dietary diversity. And so examining those linkages and whether that is in fact correct or a reasonable hypothesis, I think is an interesting question to look at and a possible opportunity to link projects across the Phil.
Okay, last slide, and then we're open for questions. Again, a big thanks to the team.
Thank you very much, Laura and Austin, and so much information. And each of these projects, I think, is worthy of an hour of discussion to really dive in and dig into these results. But to save an hour of time for our last three projects, we need to go ahead and move on now. But what I'd like to do is suggest that questions and comments be typed into the chat, and perhaps we could follow up on the presentations today with a exchange by email or other means to get that feedback to these teams. The original vision was to have these discussions at our annual meeting when we would have more time together.
Mark,
Yes.
it's me, Rohana.
Yes.
I have a just quick sort of a question and a clarification. It won't take probably long.
Yes.
Maybe Laura can sort of answer.
Yes.
One of your take-home messages or whatever conclusions is that the I think the 2 slides before is the fishing household, children in fishing households don't perform well. They are sick, they are malnutrient, and they have diarrhea, you name it, right? And now you are also trying to develop interventions to improve the situation. My simple question is why? Why they are like that? In a fishing household, we expect everyone to have more fish. In a fishing household, we expect people to have more access to fish. Why children are like that?
I mean, Rohana, that is the paradox, right? And we set out to understand that question. And I think it has to do with, underlying poverty. And that is, a large part of what we're doing with the Fish Innovation Lab is we're trying to improve livelihoods at the same time as we improve nutrition.
So my question is why the difference between non-fishing and fishing households, and also the fishing households having less and less fish in the family? You mean that they sell everything, or why? What's the reason?
I mean, we had some great community meetings where I was astonished to hear that they simply didn't understand how important fish was for nutrition. And they, for them, it's a trade-off. It's an opportunity cost. If they sell their fish, they can buy a whole lot more corn, right? Which is going to feed more family members. But that is not what they need nutritionally, the vulnerable groups. So, I mean, it's a very important question, and we have to address it from multiple angles, not just from, the poverty, livelihood, or nutrition awareness, but multiple angles to ensure these households are taken care of. Thank you.
Thank you. I also come from an island where there is a lot of, sort of fishes all around the island, and there's plenty of fish they eat in the household, so the fish is the main thing that they eat. So I mean, sort of it's a different paradox, as you said. It's interesting to know, right? Thank you.
If I may add, Laura, some previous research has actually shown that fishing communities lack alternative livelihood activities. So, for example, they rely mostly on fishing, and therefore, to be able to get other meals like corn, they would rather sell fish that then they can use the money to buy a variety of other meals to feed their families. This is not true for non-fishing households who have a wide variety of alternative livelihoods. So I think the discussion around there has been documented by previous research in that line. So probably what we found out is actually the truth.
Thank you, Andrew. Okay. Yes, Rihanna, and thank you for that question. You hit kind of on the sweet spot of the nutrition findings from this project. It is a real paradox. Okay,